Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of our weekly market wrap. I'm Matthew Grishman with 401k Masters. Thanks for being here. With the markets having another pretty quiet week, I thought I'd go a little off topic again this week and talk about one of my favorite things in the whole wide world to do with my 14-year-old and my 11-year-old. We love sitting on the couch when we get to still do that and watch old Tom and Jerry cartoons, the ultimate David and Goliath story in a cartoon. What we love so much about Tom and Jerry is just sitting there laughing, watching this little Jerry just absolutely humiliate and make a complete ass out of this cat, Tom. So one day when we were sitting there watching this cartoon, my 11-year-old Lucas, during the commercials, he stops and looks at me with this real serious look on his face. And he says to me, "Dad, how come Jerry, the small mouse, is always making a fool and beating Tom? I just don't get it." And I kind of stopped, and I really appreciated this very intriguing question from my son because you have to know about him. He's a full head shorter than almost any of his friends at school or on any of his teams. He's a little guy. And I looked at Lucas and I said, "You know, buddy, for much the same reason why you've been able to take advantage of your size and your smarts, so is Jerry. You see, just like you on the baseball field and on the basketball court, you've been able to use your smarts and your size to your advantage. Well, so does Jerry." Lucas kind of sat back and thought about that for a minute. He turned, he looked at his much bigger older brother, gave him a little wink, and then sat back and resumed laughing once the show came back on. Now, the reason I start with this kind of family story today is because I read a really interesting article this morning on Bloomberg. It's called "Small Businesses Are Going on a Hiring Binge." And what the whole gist of the article was about is how small businesses are finally seeing this economic recovery that we've been in since May of 2009 come full circle as small businesses are finally going back on a hiring binge. I mean, historically, small business has been responsible for almost all of the job growth here in this country. And what we've seen just in the last 4 months is that 84 of every 100 new jobs created in this country today have been the result of small business hiring. Now, when I talk about small business, I'm defining that as a company with 500 or fewer employees. I'm a small business owner, so this is something that I'm incredibly proud of. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when you compare this to what's happening in big business, when you look at the biggest companies in America today, companies like Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, they're really struggling. You know, their desire for world dominance to being the biggest is what's ultimately hurting them right now. I've read article after article about job cuts and layoffs at some of these biggest companies, yet here we are as small business owners going on this hiring binge. Why the difference? Well, for the big companies out there, part of the downside, or I guess a business risk that they expose themselves to by wanting to be the biggest, is something we call currency risk. Now, currency risk is something that typically only happens or only is exposed to the bigger companies that seek to do business outside of the borders of the United States. This is what currency risk is basically in a nutshell. In effect, if you're Coca-Cola, and you're generating a whole bunch of revenues overseas outside of the borders of the United States, a big portion of your revenues are actually going to come from a different currency, something like the euro or the yen. Once you raise that currency, or once you receive that currency through the revenues you create by selling your soda in Europe or in Japan, you've then got to convert that currency back to dollars for accounting purposes here in the United States. Well, for those of you that have been paying attention to the news, the dollar has actually been increasing in value. It's been rallying here lately. So if we sell a bunch of stuff in euros and then have to convert it back to dollars, which are more expensive, we actually lose money on the deal. Our revenues become worth less on our accounting balance sheets. So this is what's really hurting most of the big corporations today, is this currency risk. As a small business owner, all the business I do is right here inside the borders of the United States. All of my revenue comes to me in dollars. So here's the bottom line. If Tom wants to keep going out and focusing on how to become the biggest, that's fine. Because Jerry here is focused on being the best. So for all my small business owner friends out there, I say hire on. Last week, I talked a lot about leadership. And although we've seen some change in leadership across big corporations like Walmart, Starbucks, we've seen it at Costco, at Southwest Airlines, there have been a handful. But the majority of true leaders come from small business. We're the ones creating the jobs. We're the ones who are about being the best, not the biggest. So that's all we've got to report from this week. Thanks again for watching. And don't forget, stop and take a break every once in a while and eat some cheese. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.